Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker, and this evening I'm joined by no one. I do have some great guests lined up for you, and some great stories coming up. A High Court judge has ruled that a hotel housing asylum seekers in Epping must close. CEOs of Britain's top 100 companies have received pay rises, or record pay rises, I should say, for the third year in a row. I also speak to an award-winning Iranian filmmaker, Sepideh Farsi, on her new documentary on the genocide in Gaza. And the terrorism case against one of Kneecap's members has been delayed. There were still some dramatic scenes from outside the courtroom, though, so we will be showing you those. Stay tuned for all of that. As ever, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. A High Court judge has ruled that a hotel housing asylum seekers in the London suburb of Epping must close. The Bell Hotel has been the site of large protests since early July, and that was after one of its residents was charged with sexual offences against a 14-year-old girl. Now, some of those protests were peaceful, involving residents, but they also turned violent after members of far-right groups like Homeland and Blood and Honour got involved, as well as people affiliated with anti-Islam group For Britain and the organisation Combat 18. The case against the hotel was brought by Epping Council, who argued that the use of the hotel to house asylum seekers breached planning regulations. So they argued the hotel had approval to be a place for temporary residents, not semi-permanent ones. And despite a last-minute attempt by Home Secretary Yvette Cooper to get the council's case dismissed, the judge issued an injunction. And so he ordered that asylum seekers be moved out of the hotel by 4 p.m. on the 12th of September. Now, this case is pretty significant because it's the first time a judge has ruled in favour of a council making this kind of application. On previous occasions, the courts have refused to get involved. And in his ruling, Mr. Justice Ayres also said the protests outside the hotel had played a role in his judgment, albeit only a limited one. So he said that given that proper planning consent to change the use of the hotel hadn't been granted, local residents' fear of crime by the men staying in the Bell, the lawful protests taking place outside the hotel, as well as unlawful activities that arose around those protests, meant there was a risk of injustice if no injunction was granted. So he sort of said he's taking all of these things into account. So those fears and protests alone wouldn't have been enough to warrant his ruling, and this was principally about what might otherwise seem like a fairly dry planning dispute. But despite that legal detail, some on the right are seeing the Epping ruling as a roadmap for more. So writing in the Telegraph, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has said that the Epping case shows the way to win for those opposed to Britain's asylum system, while calling for the detention and deportation of thousands of, in his words, illegal immigrants. Now, in that piece, Farage says this: "Now, the good people of Epping must inspire similar protests around Britain. Wherever people are concerned about the threat posed by young and undocumented males living in local hotels and who are free to walk their streets, they should follow the example of the town in Essex. Let's hold peaceful protests outside the migrant hotels and put pressure on local councils to go to court to try and get the illegal immigrants out. We now know that together we can win." And more councils are already following Epping's path. So the leader of Broxbourne Council, that's just outside London, appeared on the Today programme this morning.
So we are going to be looking at the ruling of Epping yesterday, and we will be expecting to go down the same path as Epping. We have tried previously in the past, especially when the hotel opened. We tried to get legal advice and was always told that we didn't, we couldn't do anything to stop the hotel coming, or that we wouldn't be able to seek closure. What Epping have done is they have really set a precedent for local councils. So we will be looking at going down the same pathway that Epping have done.
And when you talk about the hotel, it's a hotel in Cheshunt, isn't it? A town in your area. Is it, again, do you believe, vulnerable on the question of planning law? In other words, you are going to claim that it doesn't have proper planning permission to do what it does?
Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is.
Now, the Home Office is, perhaps understandably, not very happy with the prospect of other councils following Epping. Last month, there were 210 hotels across the UK housing a total of 30,000 asylum seekers. That's a lot of accommodation to find at potentially very short notice. I mean, the government are also limited in their ability to make any kind of convincing argument defending the use of these hotels, as they pledged to wind them down when they were elected last summer. And most people do agree that hotels often based in small communities are far from the ideal place to house large numbers of asylum seekers. So where should they be housed instead? Well, on BBC Breakfast, Reform's Richard Tice had this advice for the government.
Well, maybe the government should do what the British people want, which is to process these people, reject their applications and deport them.
There's a bit of you're not properly processing them if you've prejudged that you're going to reject their applications before deporting them. I'm not even sure the British public would agree with Richard Tice there. I think he might be being somewhat presumptuous. He was being presumptuous. Dan Jarvis, Security Minister, probably being somewhat more evasive. He struggled with the question of where these people would be housed, if not hotels, on the Today programme.
The appropriate setting will be a range of other different sort of sets of arrangements
Can you
in
name
different parts of the country. Well, we are working through the options of what they might look like.
We've had a year.
We've had a year, and during that time, we've returned 35,000 people who didn't have a right to be here, and we've increased asylum decision-making by 116%.
Yeah, but you have to do more than one thing. This is an issue, a live issue now. We've had somebody on the programme this morning saying the First Council, Broxburn Council, saying they're going to seek legal advice whether they can now do the same. This problem is going to get bigger. It's a headache for your government. Could you at least answer just so specifically, if it's not hotels, as Security Minister, what is it?
It won't be hotels because of the commitment that we've made, and therefore it will have to be a range of other more appropriate accommodation. I mean, your point about the legal challenge is right, but this is not a new issue. As I say, there were discussions around a legal challenge.
But you are a relatively new government, so it's a chance for you to say, you've said all the other points which are important to hear. They're about the stream and how you stop this, and that New Deal today, which you've mentioned with Iraq, all important. But in the meantime, with thousands of people, if it's not hotels, it is important to know what.
Yeah. So for reasons that I completely understand, you're focusing on one particular bit of this problem, and I'm evidencing the activity right across the sort of the spectrum of the challenge in terms of the leveraging diplomatic relations with our partners internationally and stopping the flow of people getting to the northern beaches of France in the first place, which is my primary area of concern.
So you might think that clip was going around in circles, but I have to say that part of the conversation, I was listening to the Day programme this morning, went on for ages. So she was saying, I mean, are they going to be staying in private rental accommodations? Are they going to be staying in barracks? And he's like, clearly he'd been told by the press person not to say where they'd be housed because he didn't want a big headline saying migrants will be housed in council homes or something like that, because then the right would also mobilise against that. I suppose a more legitimate reason, potentially, according to ITV's Paul Brand, one reason the government doesn't want to talk about where asylum seekers will go is that it could allow the far right to mobilise in those areas, although that wouldn't really work in terms of category of housing. Again, also, that probably doesn't trump people's right to know the government's plans, but it is undoubtedly a genuine concern, especially since some media seem to be platforming extremists without alerting their viewers. So last night, LBC put out this video of Epping residents' reactions, or what they said was Epping residents' reactions to the hotel ruling.
I haven't stopped smiling, really, because, as I said, for 5 years this hotel's blighted us.
Where does it go from here? Where does it go from here? That's the big question.
The asylum system is broken, and if you have a migrant hotel, you should go out and protest it.
I don't like it on my doorstep, but in fairness, you've got to live somewhere.
It's not fit for our community. We don't want it, and our community's in danger. We don't want these people here.
Now, one of those men is more than just an ordinary Epping resident. This guy's Callum Barker, a member of the Homeland Party. Now, last month, The Times reported that Homeland was helping to organise the Epping protests. In that article, The Times reported this. Callum Barker, Adam Clegg and Andrew Piper are the sole administrators of Epping Says No. That's a Facebook group with more than 1,500 members where demonstrations are being advertised and coordinated. In this, however, they make no mention of the fact that they are all members of Homeland, which Hope Not Hate, an anti-fascist organisation, has described as the biggest fascist neo-Nazi party in the UK. And that's an allegation the party denies. So that was LBC presenting a member of Homeland as just an ordinary concerned citizen. But it gets even worse, because in late July, Andy Hughes, host of the Crime Agents podcast, spoke to Callum Barker at an Epping protest.
Problem is, a couple of your members have been, there's pictures of them, I've got them here on my phone if you want me to show you them, of doing Nazi salutes. What do you say about that?
I'm not a fascist. I'm not a Nazi. I'm a local resident. Stand up for what I believe in. Those members, they're not here to stay. They're not with us. It's about the girls and getting that hotel closed down. It's not about me.
Tell us about the Homeland Party. I mean, that's obviously, it was a splinter cell of Patriotic Alternative, which are labelled as extreme. Were you a member of Patriotic Alternative as well?
It's not a splinter group or anything like that. It's a registered political party with the Electoral Commission. Been registered for about 3 years or so now.
Yeah.
I haven't got much time to talk about it. As I said, it's not about the party. It's not about party politics. We're here to stand up for the young girls. And if you want to find out more, go to homelandparty.org or .co.uk, I believe it is. You read more about it.
And just tell me, I'll give you another opportunity to address the allegations about pictures of people in your party doing Nazi salutes. Why do you want to associate yourself with those people?
I am a member of the Homeland Party.
Those members are doing Nazi salutes, Callum.
I believe in Homeland Party politics. I believe in remigration.
So do you denounce those pictures? Do you denounce your mates who are doing those?
For a start, I've got no idea who you're talking about.
Do you want me to show you the pictures?
They're not my mates. I don't know.
Do you want me to show you the pictures?
Feel free to. As I said, I'm here to stand up for the girl. I personally believe you're here to slander local residents.
Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with that interview, sort of a challenging interview for a far-right agitator who's pretending to just be any old resident. But it's awkward because Andy Hughes isn't just the host of the crime agency, he's also LBC's crime correspondent. So they're probably lacking some decent channels of internal communication. If one guy in the company is interviewing that guy, recognizing he's a far-right extremist, and then someone else in the company is putting out a clip sort of describing him as just a random local resident. I'm joined now by Lou Calvey, Executive Director of Asylum Matters, an asylum rights campaigning charity. Welcome back to the show, Lou. I want to begin by asking you about this ruling. So it means the hotel protests and the far-right elements within them have basically got what they wanted. So they wanted the hotel closed, they did these protests, and now it's being closed. Does that set a dangerous precedent?
Evening, Michael. Lovely to see you again. Yes, I think it does set a really, really dangerous precedent. I think with the context certainly over the last year since last summer's violence, there has been an increasingly emboldened and confident far right in the UK, and certainly working within the refugee asylum migrants' rights space. Things are feeling very different. Things are feeling very dangerous, both in terms of the people that we work with, but in terms of us as charities and organisations as well. And I think with Reform now holding some key councils, let's not forget that Reform have a presence in Kent, which is a significant area in terms of supporting particularly unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. They had already stated at the time of their local election wins that their intent, I think it was Zia Youssef who said that they intended to use lawfare against asylum hotels to try and get them shut down in their areas. And certainly this sets a worrying precedent from that perspective. And I say that as someone who has spent the last sort of 4 or 5 years campaigning against hotels, against asylum hotels. As you said in the run-up, we all agree that hotels are not a suitable place to be accommodating people while they're waiting for their asylum claim. But we need to focus our fury on government and poor asylum policy. There's never an excuse to target individual refugees and to make them feel even more fear. And my worry is that that's what we're going to see.
From your perspective, where should asylum seekers be housed? Because my assumption is the reason that in the clip I showed before, Dan Jarvis didn't want to say, oh, it will be in private accommodation, or it will be in barracks, or it will be in council homes or whatever, because whatever answer he gives, there's going to be people who say that that's completely outrageous. So, I mean, what should the Labour government do at this point?
I think the Labour government have painted themselves into a corner on this. I think they've got quite a significant problem. They should have seen the warning signs around the Bell Hotel and decanted it and withdrawn it from use months ago when it first started to rumble again. I mean, the Bell Hotel has been subject to quite a lot of, the people there have been subject to quite a lot of harassment and abuse over the last sort of 4 or 5 years since it opened, and it was withdrawn from usage for a period, and then it was reopened. I think, the Labour government here have been quite arrogant in their approach, and I think they massively underestimated the scale of threat that people were facing, both in terms of the physical immediate threat, but also in terms of the legal threat. So they have really painted themselves into a corner. I think they will be praying for a good outcome on their appeal. And I think they will be quite urgently looking at the other 200 hotels and whether or not there are similar planning concerns around that. But in the absence of that, what we're talking about here is just over 100 people in that hotel that they are going to have to find alternative accommodation for. Now, in and of itself, I don't think that's a massive logistical problem for them. They have a system that can flex around that. And inevitably, I suspect that those residents from the Bell will be moved to other hotels. The problem that they will have is if those other hotels have similar rulings, and then you'll start to see the use of hotels really start to disintegrate. And as you said in your piece earlier, there's around 30,000 people being accommodated in hotels. Government have said that they have pledged to stop the use of hotels, quite right. And in fairness to this government, they have massively reduced the use of asylum hotels. I think at its peak, it was around double what it is now. So I think at the peak, there was around 400 hotels. There's around 200 now. And I think at the highest, there was around 56,000 people. We're talking about 30,000 at the moment. So Labour have made some fair progress in a year. Credit for that. If they need to move 30,000 people from hotels, they have got a very significant problem. Because the reason people are in hotels, and you need to get to the reason people are in hotels, it's not because of the numbers of people arriving, which is, what Reform and some of the other right-wing commentators would have us believe. It's mainly because of Tory policy to stop asylum decision-making and grow that backlog. That takes a lot of time to recover from. It's still taking far too long to make an asylum decision, which is why we're seeing very progress, but slower progress than the public wants to see on closing the hotels. Ultimately, what they need to do is get back to their normal operating system, pre sort of Tory government, where there was a 6-month asylum processing service standard. It was actually a pledge from the Home Office. It was a 6-month service standard that people's asylum claim would get processed within 6 months. Now, if you look at arrival numbers, I think in the year ending March, there was 109,000 people claiming asylum. The National Audit Office report on asylum accommodation, they actually went in and counted the number of bed spaces in all forms of asylum accommodation, and not counting the barracks, the large-scale sites, and not counting the hotels, there's around 58,000 bed spaces in community-based accommodation already in the asylum pipeline. So that's not new accommodation, that's already there. That's already within the government flow, ready to be used. If you have a 6-month service standard, my maths isn't my forte, but if you have 109,000 people arriving a year, you have bed space for 58,000, then you've got enough accommodation for your 6-month service standard. 6 months is ample to make an asylum claim. So when you add all of that together, in the normal operating model, there is no problem with asylum accommodation. There's enough already there. We don't need hotels. We don't need large-scale sites. What we need to do is clear that backlog. And that's what the Labour government need to double down on, and they need to make decisions quickly. If they can do that, then they will see significant progress on their hotel closures. But that's not going to be quick. So I think all eyes turn to this appeal hearing in the first instance, and then other legal challenges and how wide-scale a problem the Home Office have got with their hotel contracts, and whether or not there are other hotel providers that are similarly going to be found to be fallen foul of planning legislation. I suspect, just my hunch, there may well be quite a few hotel providers that will be found similarly to have not gone through the proper planning cycle. So if this decision stands, this precedent stands, then there's a problem. If this precedent doesn't stand and they win their appeal, government have got a different problem, because then they'll face all of the accusations of two-tier justice. Or there is an emboldened far right in our country, and government need to start making headway on that. They firstly need to reform parliamentary standards. Some of the things that parliamentarians have stood up and said are outrageous. So they need to reform parliamentary standards. They need to start looking, as you said, at media standards, platforming far right activists and making that seem like it's normal public conversation, which I don't think it is. Government, I think, would do well to pay attention to what they need to do to combat far right, rather than going down a cycle of ever decreasing circles of more and more anti-migrant policies and anti-migrant approaches, which is what they seem to be doing instead.
And I suppose the Labour government seem, in a panic, basically, because as far as I can tell, they don't think this issue is going to remotely subside until people can no longer see lots and lots of mainly young men crossing across the channel to the UK. Do you think that moving from hotels to the boats, which is the other big issue, do you think that while that's still going on, sort of the politics of migration is going to just keep shifting to the right?
Totally, Michael, totally. I think there is something in the psyche of this country when it comes to small boat arrivals that is undeniable, and it really does exercise and mobilise the far right. And while we continue to have so much focus and scrutiny and exposure around small boat arrivals and the humans on those journeys, then I fear that this rhetoric will continue, and it will continue to build in the momentum around it. So yeah, absolutely. They need to sort asylum policy. Again, it comes back to the fact that the only way to truly address some of these factors is with embracing progressive asylum policies. And it feels like we are light years away from government being prepared to do that. And if they don't, all it will do is oxygenate Farage, Reform, and the far right.
What do you mean by progressive asylum policies? Because I suppose this is one where I feel like there are no easy answers, because people say safe routes. If you did safe routes from France, I think that would probably be fine, because you just have sort of a similar number of people coming across the channel, and then they're no longer coming on boats and you can process them fine, good. I think if you'd still then be piggybacking off, Fortress Europe's policies whereby they're sending millions of pounds to dictators in Libya to try and catch people on the way here. But if you put safe routes, say, along the route, so say in North Africa or whatever, you would have way more people applying, and either that would sort of create lots and lots of numbers that people would probably have a backlash against, or you wouldn't end up stopping the boats because the people who were prioritized might not be the young men who are most able to afford to come across the channel. So I suppose I see this as a bit of an impossible situation. I wonder if you've got a more constructive answer than I do.
Well, I'm not sure. You're right. I think and this is why I think it doesn't always lend itself to mainstream media, because mainstream media and the public want quick riposts and simple solutions. And the reality is, I don't think there are those simple solutions, and we need to be honest about that. Firstly, I would say that we need significant global change. The UK as one country cannot solve and address these problems on our own. What we can do is convene a conversation globally. We could see our government try and lead in this space with European colleagues, with North America, with Australia, with all of the countries that can and should be taking more refugees. We need to work together to develop those plans to do that in a sustainable way. Then you will start to see some progress on the global problem of dangerous migration. But having said that, because that's all huge and going to take a very long time, I think there are quicker wins that government in the UK can do right now to start to make inroads on small boat crossings. And we hear, safe routes all of the time, safe routes. Well, what does that actually mean? And I think we as a voluntary sector, as charities working with refugees and asylum seekers, need to make ourselves accountable for what that means. I think it means recommencing refugee resettlement. Refugee resettlement is a crucial route for people to get out of those entrenched positions of displacement. And that's a scheme operated by UNHCR. And resettlement works, at our peak just a few years ago, we were resettling 5,000-6,000 refugees a year with no problem. There was no issue. It worked for local authorities, it worked for communities, and crucially, it worked for the refugees on those journeys. We've pretty much stopped refugee resettlement. The numbers are tiny. That needs to change, and that's what is one of the factors that are forcing people into dangerous migration journeys, because they can't get access to resettlement. And Trump in the States, America was one of the most significant refugee resettlement countries. That's completely closed effectively as well. So globally, far fewer refugees are getting safe access through UNHCR resettlement processes. So that's one, reopen resettlement. Secondly, what they need to do, and they need to do it urgently, is open proper family reunification schemes. Reunifying with family members in the UK is horrific. It's massively bureaucratic. You tend to not get approvals. Even if you do get approvals, there's visa processing delays. You can't get to biometric centres. It's a nightmare. And a significant proportion of the people on small boats have family in the UK. We could address that quite quickly. The third thing we can do is explore other humanitarian visa schemes, such as the ones that we've seen for Ukrainians, the ones that we've seen for people from Hong Kong. The numbers we took through the Ukrainian visa scheme and absorbed to fanfare and welcome. We saw whole positions and movements of welcome around them. We've proven that we can offer significant numbers to sanctuary seekers to very little impact to us as UK taxpayers. Now, I'm not saying that scheme is perfect. It needs a lot of work on it, but it does prove the principle that you can take literally hundreds of thousands of refugees and absorb them without, the country falling apart at the seams, which is what those right-wing commentators would have us believe. So I think there's a few pragmatic things, short-term things that government can do. In addition, what they can do is reduce dependency in the asylum system. It costs us a lot of money, by letting people work, giving people working rights while they're going through the asylum journey so that they work, support themselves, aren't dependent on the government, aren't trapped in hotels because they're self-supporting. That, again, and it's projected that would save us billions as taxpayers, but government won't do it. There are so many progressive asylum policies that they could choose to platform instead of continuing policies of how do we keep people out. Keeping people out, these policies of keeping people out are the thing that's driving irregular migration. Because if people had access to visas, if people could legitimately and safely arrive in the UK, they would. So let's get back to doing that.
We're constantly told that economic times are tough and that the government and businesses must make tough decisions. But for Britain's CEOs, things are just fine, more than fine, in fact. For the third year in a row, CEOs of Britain's top 100 publicly traded companies have received a record pay rise. The median pay of a FTSE chief executive climbed to £4.58 million in the last financial year, up from £4.29 million a year earlier. That's an increase of nearly 7%. Which means the average FTSE 100 chief executive is now paid 122 times the salary of the average full-time UK worker. Yes, 122 times the average worker. This is all according to new research from the High Pay Centre. They're a think tank. And I spoke to their director, Luke Hildyard, and asked him why he thinks CEOs currently have it so good.
I think there's a number of reasons. I think it's kind of there's a sort of subconscious bias in like business thinking in favor of the idea that business success is driven by one or two individuals at the top, as opposed to the wider economic context or the contribution of the wider workforce. If you look at the companies that have paid their CEOs lots of money, it includes like arms manufacturers who've obviously benefited from the surge in defense spending in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. It includes mining companies, oil companies that have benefited from surging commodity prices post the pandemic. CEOs are generally paid over 3-year periods, or their incentive payments are based on performance over 3-year periods. So for these pay awards, which were to the end of 2024, you've got 2022, 2023, 2024, when the world was accelerating out of the pandemic, economically speaking, and obviously companies were much more successful than they were in 2020 and 2021. So their profitability increases, their share price increases, and automatically that gets attributed to the CEO, even though it's quite clearly contextual factors that are doing more of the work. Yet the CEO hits performance targets for increasing profitability or increasing share price and rakes in these enormous sums of money, whereas the wider workforce just gets paid their regular salary, doesn't really share in the fruits of business success. And I think that's one aspect of very high CEO pay that's considered particularly egregious.
The company that has paid the highest salaries to their two CEOs, I think, is called Melrose. Now, I think most of our audience won't have heard of Melrose. Who are they, and why have they managed to pay their CEOs quite so much?
So they're a company they're a listed company, but they're kind of like follow the model that like is typical of private equity, where they take over companies that are perceived to be failing and turn them around very quickly and sell them on for a profit. What's interesting about their pay award is that it's very much like American style. If the company increases in value, they get the CEO gets a proportion of that value. So, like, you know, if the share price doubles, the CEO will get like 5% of the increase in value, which, when you're talking about an increase of £1 billion or something, is a very significant amount of money. It's kind of similar to the model of the pay package at Tesla, which people might have read about in the news, incredibly controversial, that's handed over $50 billion of company value to Elon Musk. And you might say that if the CEOs are generating all this value, isn't it fair that they get a small proportion of that? And I think that's misguided for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as I say, the CEOs are benefiting enormously, but the wider workforce not so much. And then secondly, if people say that the sort of US top pay culture creates a more dynamic, entrepreneurial, innovative economy, but the US has a number of economic advantages: cheaper energy, younger population, big homogenous single market, that are hugely important factors in explaining sort of the economic outperformance of the US in recent years. And I think it's stretching things a great deal to suggest that their approach to top pay is driving that outperformance. Conversely, if you look at problems in the US, the vast economic inequality, the higher crime rate, poorer health outcomes, lower life expectancy, worse poverty, worse extreme poverty, that very definitely is linked to the top pay culture that they have over there. So rather than being an explanation for economic outperformance, top pay culture in the US is actually holding back living standards over there, and I think is something that we'd be very misguided to want to replicate in the UK and in Europe.
Well, I mean, what would you actually do about it, though? I mean, do you think the government should legislate for a maximum wage or maximum pay differentials? I mean, I would assume, Rachel Reeves is terrified that she's given business the jitters, and sort of even if in an ideal world, businesses could be just as productive if they, had lower pay differentials. I'm sure that's the case. Given that we live in a globalized economy, a business is presumably going to prefer to be headquartered where they have more freedoms to pay their CEO whatever they like. Is it a bit of a tough sell to say that this Labour government should be introducing something like a maximum wage or maximum pay differentials to businesses right here, right now?
So I actually think a maximum pay ratio would be a very good idea. We've got pay ratios typically running to like over 100 to 1. You don't have to have total equality, but you could reduce it a great deal and without causing economic damage, and while ensuring that more of the fruits of business success accrue to workers, to lower middle earners, raising living standards rather than going to people who are already very well off. And on the question as to whether they'd all leave, the short answer is that they wouldn't, and it wouldn't matter if they did. Firstly, there isn't much evidence of an international market for CEOs. There are high-profile examples, but it's generally very rare that companies poach a CEO from an international rival. Doing the job in one business culture is very different to doing it in another. And if FTSE 100 CEOs all left because they were being paid 10 or 20 times their average colleague rather than 100 or 200 times, the likelihood is that they wouldn't be moving to be CEOs of US companies. They'd be moving to be to doing less prestigious, less well-paid jobs than the ones they've got at the moment. And then secondly, CEOs and other high earners aren't magically and uniquely gifted. I always think this argument that they would all leave is kind of demeaning to the wider population, in that it says all our prosperity is bestowed on us by this tiny number of people at the top. In actual fact, they've just been given the training and networks and confidence to equip them to do those jobs, and they'd be more or less interchangeable with other people who have been given the same opportunities if they were getting those opportunities. If business leadership positions were paid 10 or 20 times the typical worker as opposed to over 100 times, they're still going to be very prestigious and well-rewarded posts with lots of demand to do them, and the world really isn't going to fall apart.
The other thing Labour might say is, this is unfair, but because you're talking about such a small number of people, 100 people, even if you tax them a lot, I mean, that money's not going to go very far. Or if you sort of radically limited their salary, presumably if you're in a large company with thousands of employees, then reducing their salary is, if you spread it out to the workers below them, it might be more fair. I mean, I agree. But would they really feel it? And they might say the priority should be to go after a much bigger group of people, because if you're talking about the top 100, that's just not that much cash.
In some cases, we're talking about big employers spending tens of millions of pounds on just a couple of people at the top. The number of companies that are spending more than 10 million on their CEO this year increased 30%. Number spending more than 20 million on their entire executive team increased by 75%. So those are actually big sums of money with big opportunity costs. And if you were reducing top pay, you'd be freeing up millions to invest in the earnings of lower and middle income workers, training them up and developing them so that they could do more higher paying, more productive jobs, or investing in R&D, investment and innovation and productivity for the company, which is going to be of greater value to the UK economy. Secondly, the CEO pay figures. The CEO is obviously just one individual. The executive team is usually 2 or 3 individuals, and that's all that's disclosed in companies' annual reports. But you can be sure that if their pay is going up, as it has done over recent decades, from 10 or 20 times the typical UK worker to 100, 200 times, then the pay of the other senior managers just below them is going to have increased a lot as well. And it's not just literally 100 people who are racing away from those in the middle and at the bottom. It's more like the top 1% The top 1% in the UK as a whole take about 13%, typically sort of 13 to 15% of all national income in recent years. And that's actually a really significant sum of money. In certain other countries, Nordics, Netherlands, it's more like 5 or 6%. That was what it was in the UK pre-Thatcher era. And if you talk about the difference between, nearly 10% of national income share that's gone from the 99% to the 1%, that's a lot of money. And if you could get it back from the 1% to the 99%, you'd be doing a hell of a lot for living standards.
And I think on the left, sort of the activist left and the academic left, I suppose starting with Piketty, now with Gary Stevenson as well, there's a focus on wealth as opposed to income, and wealth inequality as opposed to income inequality. I know sort of Gary especially has a slogan, tax wealth, not work. He says he doesn't want to increase taxes on incomes. Now, I'm not saying, I assume he probably wouldn't disagree with the report you've just delivered here. But your organisation, your NGO focuses on salaries. Do you think that sort of in all this focus on taxing wealth, people are ignoring inequality in incomes as well?
It is important to emphasise that in addition to reducing inequality through redistribution, we need to stop it from emerging in the first place through pre-distribution. And if you look historically at how we've achieved big leaps in living standards over time, you can look at like the aftermath of the Second World War, the creation of the welfare state and the NHS funded through progressive taxation, which is redistribution, obviously. But if you look at like the Industrial Revolution, the gains of that would have entirely gone to wealthy industrialists if it hadn't been for the formation of trade unions and the legalization of trade unions, which enabled the workers to get a larger share of the wealth created by their labour pre-taxation. Similarly, the minimum wage is essentially pre-distribution. That's redistributing from generally wealthier business owners to lower earning workers. Some of the proposals we're talking about in our report, I think, could have an effect a bit like that again. So to be fair, the government is pushing through this employment rights bill, which will expand access to trade union representation. Hopefully it gives people the opportunity to make a more informed choice about union representation. Similarly, we're also talking a lot about worker directors on company boards. So in addition to like the shareholder representatives at board level, you have elected board members who are chosen from the workforce and who are going to give a worker's perspective in deliberations about pay and about how the company should expend its resources more generally. And I think that would do a lot to tackle income and wealth inequality at source, raise living standards in a way that's potentially more durable, because unlike a wealth tax, they can't be undone with a stroke of a pen if, say, a less progressive government comes into power. And yeah, I do think we're maybe not thinking about that enough on the progressive side of politics, even though I think the arguments for a wealth tax are very well founded and should be made, as well as the arguments for pre-distribution rather than instead of.
Award-winning Iranian filmmaker Sepideh Farsi has a new film out this week on the Israeli genocide in Gaza. Here's the trailer.
Where are you now?
I'm Gaza. This is my neighborhood. No one live here or there or there. There's no one.
When the war started on October 7th, I was traveling around the world, presenting my last film that talks about a war I've personally experienced as a teenager in Iran. I decided to go to Cairo in order to cross through Rafah, but I couldn't because all the roads to Gaza were blocked. Instead, I started filming Palestinian refugees who were just arriving from Gaza. Through one of them, I came to know Fatem.
I'm a photographer.
Yes, I saw your photos. Meeting her was like a mirror held in front of me that made me realize how much both our lives are conditioned by walls and wars.
You have many options to die here in the south Gaza. You can die by bombing or fear, starvation.
Each of our conversations could be the last one, as Israeli bombs fall everywhere in Gaza all the time.
I was so much.
Yeah, me too.
So every time we connect, and I can see her face, it feels like a miracle.
The film subject who you saw in that clip is 25-year-old photojournalist Fatma Hassona. On the 16th of April this year, so the day after the documentary was accepted to the Cannes Film Festival, an Israeli airstrike killed Hassona alongside 9 of her family members. Now, at the time, Farsi and Hassona had been trying to find a way for Hassona to travel to Cannes and return to Gaza after the festival's conclusion. Of course, that was not possible. The film is on general release from this Friday. Earlier today, I spoke to its director, Sepideh Farsi, and I asked her to speak to me about Fatma Hassona.
Sometime around in late spring 2024, I was in the middle of a tour with my other film, the animation, The Siren. And while I was traveling, it became urgent to me to get access to the Palestinian voice from inside Gaza, because it became obsessional in a way, because I kept listening to different channels and different medias, and all they were talking about was about Palestinians as though they were just figures and, casualties, but never were there to address, whether in the studio, if people of Palestinian origin, descent, or people from inside Gaza. So I really felt the urge to get to know what that meant, being under the bombs. As an Iranian, I have some experience of the war. I couldn't get by anymore. So I went to Cairo, and since I could not cross and go inside Gaza, which was very naive of me, thinking that I could have. I was in touch with other Palestinian refugees, and one of them introduced me to Fatma Hassona. I called her Fatma because I was still desperate to get this voice from inside. And the description I got from our common friend was that she's a brilliant person with a lot of energy, photographer, amazing girl. And when I met her the first time, which is the video that starts the film, that begins the film, it was literally that. I had the feeling that everything that I had heard about her matched the person I had in front of me. That smile, that energy, that resilience, she was solar, brilliant, all the while a very ordinary young woman as well, but someone very special as well, and talented. And so we spent a year speaking and exchanging videos, audios, text messages, everything, many things, on a daily basis. And we were so happy, both of us, I think. And you see that in the film, that it was such a joyous moment when we would both connect and we could talk, despite the disconnections, despite the low debit, despite everything. And I think I really got close to her. I really almost touched her. We never met really, but I felt that we were very close, and I think it was mutual. Until that moment, I knew a few days before, but I wanted the announcement to be public and official before I told her. So April 15th, 2025, the announcement is made in the morning, and I write to her to connect because I have something important to tell her. And it took her a few hours to go to a connection point that was always there, because she needed to move from her house and go somewhere else. In fact, that last conversation is in her own room, but it did take her time to connect somehow. And then I told her, and she was so happy. And she sent me her passport. I immediately, while we were talking, sent it out for a visa application. I was confident that we could get her out and she would be with me to present the film. And the day after, she was targeted and she was killed with her own all of her family, except her mother, who survived the attack by the Israeli army, of course.
And I mean, do you think the announcement of the nomination of the film to Cannes was connected to her targeting, to the Israelis killing her, deciding to kill her?
I don't know. I don't know until they open the archives, they open the files. I would never know. Of course, I think of that every day. I ask myself the question. But as you know, and as I know, we know all that they keep targeting journalists every day, regardless of whether or not they're part of a film, just because they are journalists. It might very well be also that she was targeted only because of that, because she had done a couple of interviews, quite important interviews with Al Jazeera and another media in the weeks preceding her killing. And I think she was getting to be quite known as a photographer, photojournalist. And so it might be both of them. It might be only her being a photographer, and I wish I would come to know one day. But at the end of the day, it's just that she was killed because she was taking photographies. So,
I mean, has the Israeli army, I mean, I presume there's been no accountability here, but I mean, have they had to answer questions about why they bombed this building at that time? Have they sort of come up with some excuse, or sort of talk me through what's happened since the killing?
They immediately announced that they were trying to target a person from Hamas, a member of Hamas. And then they were asked by the organizations of Palestinian Journalists Association who that member was, because we know the name of the people who died there. It was Fatim's 10-year-old brother, 15-year-old brother, Yazan, Muhammad, 20-year-old, two sisters, one of whom was pregnant, and Fatim and her father, and the mother who survived, luckily. But so there was no Hamas member there, and we were asking them to explain who that was, and they never answered. So, it's the usual rhetoric of the IDF, always saying that there was a Hamas member around the corner. But after that, there was a report, a study done by Forensic Architecture, which is based in UK, in fact, the NGO, and they had evidence, the apartment plan, the photos and videos after the attack, and you know how they proceed. They do ballistic and 3D modeling and they conduct studies. And they concluded that it was a clear targeted attack, and the modus operandi was very similar to elimination of other journalists in Lebanon and in Palestine, because it's so horrible. She was living on the second floor of a building, and a drone was launched 2 missiles that went through the 3 top floors of that building, and they were programmed to explode only when they reached the second floor. So it cannot be anything else than a target.
And you sort of said at the start of this interview, you almost felt like naively you could just, as a journalist, go into Gaza and report. Now, obviously, it's widely publicized that Western journalists or international journalists in general can't enter Gaza. They haven't been able to since the beginning of this genocidal war. You, therefore, decided to partner with a Palestinian photojournalist in Gaza. Do you think that the role, the skill of journalists in Gaza has been taken seriously enough by Western journalists? Because I think sometimes there is this argument, we can't show you the full details of what's going on because we can't go in there ourselves. Do, I suppose, Western filmmakers, journalists need to sort of stop falling back on that excuse and saying, no, we can report what's going on, but we have to go to a Palestinian in Gaza, and that's what we're going to do?
I absolutely agree about this. I think they're doing an amazing job, the Palestinian journalists. However, or whatever their experience prior to this war was, what they've been doing for the past almost 2 years is absolutely professional, at the risk of their lives, obviously, and with horrible in horrible conditions, meaning that not only they're risking their lives, but they also need to go to connection points to charge their batteries. They're lacking the least, the smallest bit of what is needed to be provide reports professionally, and yet they're doing that. So I think, and it's because of them and thanks to them that we're disposing of all these documentation about the genocide. Were they not there, or were they not doing this, we would be left with nothing. I know a similar situation in Iran when in 2009 and ever since. Non-Iranian journalists were, first of all, in 2009, were kicked out by the Iranian regime when the uprisings happen, and this happens regularly. And so if the Iranian journalists don't do that, or if the citizen journalism does not exist, but in the case of Palestine and Gaza, it's professional journalists who are really doing it. So I think we have to take them seriously and thank them very much for what they're doing.
And I wanted to ask a question, I suppose, about you personally, because one of the changes we've seen since October the 7th is obviously massive convulsions in Iran and the situation with their government there. From my perspective, they seem somewhat weakened, with so many elements of the so-called axis of resistance being weakened, Hezbollah most importantly. I know that you have been banned from re-entering Iran since 2009 due to your opposition to the regime. And I just thought that would mean you might have a sort of unique perspective on the past 2 years. And I wondered if, you could speak about your relationship to Iran over the past 2 years and how you have thought about that.
I'm torn, between my homeland and my birth country, my country, basically. Even if I live abroad, I'm still a Iranian, and will always be. And I'm an activist for Iran and for the freedom of Iran. And of course, parallelly, because of the acuteness and gravity of what's going on in Gaza, I felt that I needed to do something. But it's not complicated in my head. It's very clear for me. I have a human stance, and as an activist, as a human global citizen, I know where I'm standing. But as a matter of fact, there has been a lot of confusion in the stances that have been taken against in the Iranian diaspora and in the world, amongst the world journalists and leadership, presuming that anything that on one side Israel is doing is self-defense and it's allowed, and on the other side, condemning things that, and for instance, for me, there is a clear line. I'm against the Iranian regime, which is a clear dictatorship, repressing Iranian citizens inside and even outside Iran sometimes, hitting us, dissidents abroad. And it does not mean that we cannot condemn what Israel is doing in Gaza just because the Iranian regime is doing the same thing. We can have, a human or a free point of view and stance, and say that I am against the Iranian regime and I am against Netanyahu and his government and the genocide that is happening in Gaza. And I condemn both, but this seems not to be always clear for everybody, and it is very hurting. So my relationship to Iran is that I'm still fighting for freedom and in my country, and I hope that it will happen soon. The women life freedom movement and generally the dissidents were hit even harder since the war started, after the October 7th, the retaliation of Israel, after the Hamas attacks. because the world attention went that way, and so the Iranian regime used that to put more pressure on dissidents. We lost many valuable lives. There were a huge amount of executions of dissidents in Iran since then. Yet women are still resisting, and Iranians generally, but we don't talk about it here. It's not a topic that is now, trendy, because Gaza and Palestine is such a tragedy, of course. But another thing that happened was that when Israel attacked Iran in June 12th, followed by the Americans attacked, again, Iranian regime used that moment of attention on the war in order to repress dissidents even more harshly. So every time there is but it's a classical, phenomenon. Every time there is a foreign threat against a dictatorial regime, or even a not dictatorial regime, they kind of hide behind that threat and put more pressure on their opponents. And this really happened in Iran, and it's ongoing. We just have Sharifeh Mohammadi's death sentence. She's an activist. It was confirmed 2 days ago by the Supreme Court of Iran, and we're really fearing for her life. It is tragic, because we really caught between two waves, and it's very hard to keep fighting as a human being generally for Palestine, for Palestinians, and also for Iran, because it is still dramatic inside my country. So sometimes we're like out of breath, we're breathless, but we have to keep doing so.
That was Sepideh Farsi speaking to me earlier today, and her film Put Your Soul on Your Hand and Walk will be released in cinemas from this Friday, so that's the 22nd of August. You can find a link to the film's full UK listings in the description below. Liam O'Hany, a member of rap trio Kneecap, who uses the stage name Chara, has appeared in Westminster Magistrates Court to face criminal charges after allegedly breaching anti-terror law. Now, arriving at court, the musician and his lawyers faced a chaotic press scrum, but he was also greeted by cheers from his supporters, with crowds shouting, "Free Mo Chara." And this was the moment he made it into the courthouse with his bandmates. Now, if you're listening on the podcast, that was the three members of Kneecap literally having to push and drag themselves through the courthouse doors because of the massive pack of journalists surrounding them. Novara Media's Rivka Brown was down at the courthouse this morning, not in that particular scrum, but amongst O'Hany's supporters instead. Here's what some of them had to say.
Do you think it's significant that the person that the government has chosen to single out with this kind of court case is Irish?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, there's a long history of trumped-up terrorism charges being used against Irish men, particularly from the north of Ireland. So it's quite symbolic, actually, particularly in the context of quite a hypocritical application of the Terrorist Act. In the north of Ireland, there are proscribed terrorist organisations like the UVF and the UDA who openly fly their flag every year and on streets across that territory. So it's really not an equal application of the law, and I think it's actually been quite helpful to raise that as a discussion item to a greater audience, both in Ireland, in the north and in the UK.
Do you think it's important that musicians retain their ability to speak the truth to power and not face censorship when they say things? This court case is about something that was said on stage.
It was said on stage, and it was, somebody threw a Hezbollah flag on the stage and he lifted it up. I think it's a total distraction, and I think it's really important if you feel it, and I certainly do feel it, being Irish. I was born here, but both my parents are Irish. I've always considered myself Irish, and I'm a Republican. I believe in a 32-county socialist republic, always have done. And, it depends if you feel it, and I feel strongly that I need to speak up at every turn. I don't know I don't know how people can live with themselves if they don't speak up, but all I know is that I have to speak up.
I think Kneecap has made huge cultural waves. I think that Kneecap speak to so many people, so many young people, and the government finds that a threat. The government finds that a threat because they are reaching the hearts and minds in ways that, you know, other forms, other mediums don't necessarily do. And so, of course, they're going to come for those people that are able to challenge the status quo. That's what it comes down to, the fact that they find them a threat.
Hannah was appearing in court after allegedly waving a Hezbollah flag at a gig at the O2 in November last year. And because Hezbollah is a prescribed organisation, publicly expressing support for the organisation is a crime in the UK. But Hannah's case has now been adjourned because his defence argued that charges had been brought too late. The prosecutor denied this, but the judge decided to pause the trial until late September, when he'll rule on whether he has the jurisdiction to hear the case. Posting after that ruling, Kneecap shared this.
Us as a distraction from the real story. We know, unfortunately, this story will end up in the media today, while Israel commits genocide at the same time. So everybody, continue to speak about Palestine. Free Palestine. Thank you all for coming. Chucky Arla.
Very well put. And I mean, those crowds, if it was difficult for the government to enforce their prescription of Hezbollah, what's going to happen when it's the Palestine Action protesters? Well, not the Palestine Action protesters, the people who have been arrested for alleged support of Palestine Action. When they are in court, those crowds, one would imagine, will be even bigger. And it won't just be one person, it will be hundreds of people. So, yeah, I think the anti-terror prescription laws were already looking pretty shaky before they made the crazy decision of outlawing Palestine Action. It'll be interesting to see what happens in this case. Of course, what happens in those cases of the people who are bailed or currently facing charges of anti-terror crimes when it comes to standing in Parliament Square with a few words scribbled on a white background. Let's wrap up there. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.